Welcome back, my loves. Today's story is about Mary, a woman who always knew exactly who she was, what she wanted, and where she was going. Or at least, that's what she told herself. She never expected that walking into her best friend's house on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon would be the moment that changed everything. Because on the other side of that door was Louisa, her best friend's sister. And nothing about Louisa was ordinary. Not her laugh, not her eyes. Not the way she seemed to already know things about Mary that Mary hadn't even admitted to herself yet. A story full of tension, of silences that say everything, and of the terrifying, beautiful realization that sometimes the person who mirrors you most clearly is the last person you ever expected to find. Stay with me until the end. I promise it's worth it. I wasn't supposed to stay. I remember that clearly. The way I had planned to drop off the birthday cake, hand it to whoever answered the door, say something quick about how I couldn't stay long, and drive back to my apartment before the afternoon turned into evening. That was the plan. Clean. Simple. 15 minutes. Tops. I had my keys in my hand when Louisa opened the door. Let me tell you about my best friend first. Sophia and I had been inseparable since college. The kind of friendship that survives job changes and apartment moves and bad breakups, and the slow, grinding way your 20s become your 30s. We had the shorthand. The inside jokes that didn't need setup. The ability to sit in complete silence for an hour and still feel entirely understood. She was loud where I was quiet. Impulsive where I was careful. She jumped. I calculated. For years, people assumed we balanced each other out. Maybe we did. But Sophia had a sister. And for most of the years I'd known Sophia, Louisa had been a background figure, someone I heard about more than I saw. She was 4 years younger, which felt like a bigger gap in your 20s than it actually is. She'd gone to art school in Portland while Sophia and I were doing our business degrees in Boston. She traveled. She worked seasonal jobs, ski instructor one winter, wildfire lookout one summer, something to do with a marine research station the fall after that. She was the sister who sent postcards from places most people only see in documentaries. The sister who showed up to family dinners with paint on her hands and always forgot to silence her phone. I liked the idea of her before I ever really knew her. That probably matters. Sophia talked about Louisa the way people talk about someone they admire and don't fully understand, with a mixture of warmth and exasperation that was entirely genuine. She called me from a mountain in Montana, Sophia would say, half laughing, half baffled. No service for 6 days, and then she calls me from a mountain and wants to know if I remembered the lyrics to that one song from 3rd grade. She shook her head every time she told a story like that, but she was always smiling when she did. I was in my own life, is what I'm saying. I had a routine that worked. I had an apartment I loved, a job in urban planning that genuinely interested me, a Wednesday night pottery class I'd been attending for 2 years, and a small, carefully maintained circle of people I trusted. I was not unhappy. I want to be clear about that. I was not searching for anything. I had been in relationships before, 2 of them serious, in the way that serious relationships in your late 20s feel serious. The kind that make you think for a while that you've figured something out. Both of them ended quietly, not dramatically. The kind of endings where no one is terrible, no one is the villain, and the thing you're left with is not anger, but a vague nagging sense that something essential was always slightly off frequency, like listening to your favorite song with the treble turned just wrong enough that you can't relax into it. I had told myself that was just how relationships were, that the slightly off feeling was normal, that I was too careful, too particular, too inclined to analyze things that were better left unanalyzed. I had told myself a lot of things. That Tuesday in October, I drove to Sophia's parents' house in Arlington with a cake in a white box on the passenger seat. It was her mother's birthday, a woman I'd known for years, who always called me Mija and sent me home with food I hadn't asked for, and once, during a bad breakup, had sat with me on the back porch for 40 minutes saying nothing at all, just patting my hand. I liked her enormously. I was happy to bring the cake. Sophia had texted me that morning. Just drop it off. Don't feel obligated to stay. Mom's thing starts at 6, so the house will be a zoo by then. I was planning to stay 15 minutes. The door opened before I could knock. Louisa was standing there in paint-stained overalls and a white t-shirt with the sleeves cut off. Her dark hair pulled into a bun that had given up approximately 40% of its structural integrity. Holding a can of sparkling water in one hand, and looking at me with an expression I can only describe as mildly curious. The way you look at a stray cat that has wandered onto your porch and seems friendly, but you're not quite sure yet what it wants. "You must be Mary," she said. "I must be," I agreed. She stepped back to let me in. I noticed, in the way you notice things without meaning to, that she smelled like turpentine and something citrusy underneath that. I noticed that there was a smear of cadmium yellow across her left forearm. I noticed that she moved through the doorway with an ease that I couldn't quite name. Not grace exactly. More like someone who had stopped worrying about whether or not they were taking up too much space. I followed her inside. "Sophia's in the backyard setting up chairs," Louisa said, already heading toward the kitchen. "You can put the cake in the fridge. Mom keeps reorganizing it to make room, and then there's never any actual room, so you may need to negotiate with the Tupperware situation." I laughed before I meant to. "Got it," I said. "I'm good at negotiations." She glanced back at me over her shoulder, just for a second. "Sophia said you were," she said. I don't know why that stayed with me. It was such a small thing. The implication that they had talked about me, that I existed in Louisa's knowledge of the world before I existed in her presence. It shouldn't have meant anything. People mention their friends to their sisters all the time. Of course Sophia had mentioned me. We'd been best friends for 12 years. But the way Louisa said it, with that slightly sideways glance, like she was confirming something she'd already half suspected, I felt it somewhere I couldn't quite locate. Not in my chest. Somewhere between my chest and my stomach. I put the cake in the refrigerator. I negotiated with the Tupperware. The afternoon light was coming in through the kitchen window at that particular slanted October angle that makes everything look like it belongs in a painting. I stayed for 3 hours. I told myself it was because Sophia's mother pulled me into the backyard and I couldn't find a polite exit. I told myself it was because the food was good and the company was easy and I had nowhere else to be. I told myself all kinds of reasonable things on the drive home. What I did not tell myself, not that night, not for a long time after, was that I had spent a significant portion of those 3 hours paying attention to where Louisa was in the room. The second time I saw Louisa was 6 weeks later, and I will tell you honestly that I had thought about her in the interval, not constantly, not the way you think about someone you know you're falling for. I wasn't that self-aware yet, or maybe I was that self-protective, which is the same thing in different packaging. But she surfaced in my thoughts in small, involuntary ways. When Sophia mentioned her in passing, I noticed I paid closer attention than the information warranted. Once, scrolling through my phone late at night, I found myself wondering if she had a social media presence, and then putting my phone face down on the mattress because I didn't want to know what it meant that I was wondering. I am good at not following thoughts to their conclusions. I have had a lot of practice. The second time was at a gallery opening in Cambridge, a friend of a friend's show, the kind of event where you go because you feel you should, and then spend 45 minutes holding a plastic cup of mediocre white wine, wondering when it became acceptable to leave. Sophia had dragged me. I almost didn't go. Louisa was there because the artist was a former classmate from Portland. She was wearing a black turtleneck and had her hair down, and she was standing in front of a large canvas that was mostly gray and orange, something abstract that I couldn't quite decode, with her arms crossed loosely and her head tilted very slightly to one side, like she was listening to the painting rather than looking at it. I saw her before she saw me. That matters too. The way you see someone before they see you. There's something in that moment that's entirely yours. You get to watch without being watched. And what I felt, watching Louisa stand in front of that painting, was something I can only describe retroactively as recognition, like seeing something you didn't know you'd been looking for, and then immediately looking away because the seeing it feels like too much. She noticed me about 30 seconds later. "Mary," she said, with a kind of quiet warmth that I wasn't expecting, like she was genuinely glad I was there. Like my name in her mouth was something she had decided to handle carefully. We stood in front of various paintings for the next 2 hours. I should tell you about Louisa's mind, because it is the thing that unmade me most thoroughly before anything else could. She talked about art the way I talked about city planning, with the particular enthusiasm of someone who has thought about something so deeply that the formal vocabulary of it has become invisible, and what's left is just the actual love of the subject, unmediated. She told me why the gray-orange painting worked, the tension between the warm and the cool, the way the eye was constantly negotiating between settling and being pushed. She told me about a sculptor she'd met in Portland who only worked with materials that had been used before, who talked about the memory of objects with complete seriousness. She talked about color the way I talked about zoning laws and density models, with the certainty of someone who has spent real time in the weeds of a thing and come out the other side with genuine conviction. I listened to all of it, more than I usually listen to people, more carefully, with the particular quality of attention that you reserve for things you don't want to miss. At one point she asked me about my work, and I started explaining a project I was working on, a mixed-use development in Somerville, the struggle to balance affordability requirements with what the market could actually sustain. And I noticed her leaning slightly forward, which is the physical posture of someone who is actually paying attention, and not just waiting for their turn to speak. When I mentioned something about the tension between what a neighborhood could become and what the people already living there needed it to remain, she said, "That's the same problem as any painting that's been worked on too long, actually. The question of when you're improving it and when you're erasing what made it work." I stared at her for a moment. "That's exactly it," I said. She shrugged, but there was something pleased in the corners of her mouth. "Different materials," she said. "Same argument." I drove home alone that night thinking about the argument, about materials, about what it meant that the most useful articulation of a problem I'd been wrestling with for months had come from someone I'd met twice, someone I'd categorized as Sophia's artist sister, someone whose existence had been a postcard on a refrigerator for most of my adult life. I was not thinking about Louisa as a woman I was attracted to. I want to be precise about this. The thought had not formed yet. What I had was something more diffuse and more uncomfortable. A kind of heightened awareness of her presence, a quality of attention I couldn't fully account for, a feeling that the edges of my personality were doing something different when she was nearby. Standing straighter, maybe. Or leaning slightly toward her, the way a plant leans toward light without deciding to. I told myself it was interesting. She was interesting. You could find a person interesting without it meaning anything else. I had told myself things like this before. Weeks went by. November arrived, gray and sharp-edged, the way Boston Novembers always are. Sophia and I kept our rhythms, Tuesday lunches, Sunday phone calls, the occasional Friday night where we ordered too much Thai food and watched something on television we'd both seen before. She mentioned Louisa sometimes. Louisa was in town for a while. She had a residency at a studio in Somerville, something she'd been awarded months earlier that had finally started. She would be around through February. I noted that, filed it somewhere I wasn't inspecting carefully. The third time I saw Louisa, she was sitting at Sophia's kitchen table, eating cereal at 3 p.m, with the focused contentment of someone who has decided that this is exactly the right meal, at exactly the right moment. And I walked in from the living room, and she looked up and smiled at me. And I felt something move in my chest that I can only describe now, from the safety of distance, as a door quietly opening somewhere inside me that I hadn't known was there. "Hey," she said. "Hey," I said back. She gestured at the cereal box. "There's more if you want." Sophia bought the kind with the marshmallows. which is both unnecessary and correct. I sat down across from her. I stayed for 4 hours. Sophia was there for maybe 90 minutes of it. When she went to bed, she had a 6:30 a.m. meeting, she said, the kind of apologetic exit that means you're being left in a situation you're entirely comfortable with. Louisa and I stayed at the kitchen table. We talked about everything that wasn't the thing I wasn't thinking about. We talked about the city, about what we both remembered about being 23, about a documentary she'd watched about deep-sea bioluminescence, and why the human brain finds it simultaneously beautiful and terrifying. About whether you ever actually got over the particular loneliness of feeling like you were a person that other people found just slightly difficult to fully know. That last conversation, I remember every word of it. I think some people are just tuned to a frequency that most people can't quite receive, she said, tracing the edge of her cereal bowl with her thumb. Not better or worse than other frequencies. Just not the common one. And I think those people spend a long time wondering if the problem is the signal or the receiver. I was quiet for longer than I should have been. The signal, I said finally. I used to think it was the receiver. She looked at me for a moment. Just looked. The kind of looking that doesn't have anywhere else to be. What changed? She said. I didn't have an answer. Or I had an answer I wasn't ready to give. I looked down at my hands instead, and she didn't press. And the kitchen was quiet in that comfortable way that feels like a gift you didn't expect. I drove home at midnight. I sat in my parked car for 6 minutes before I went inside. I am not naturally a dramatic person. I don't catastrophize. I analyze. I take things apart carefully and look at the components and try to understand the mechanism. It's both my best quality and the way I have sometimes talked myself out of things that would have been good for me. That night, I sat in my car, and I did not analyze anything. I just sat there, and felt something I didn't have a name for yet. Something warm and vaguely frightening, the way standing at the edge of something beautiful and very high makes you feel. Not the urge to fall, something more complicated than that. I went inside. I went to bed. I did not sleep for a long time. In the morning, I texted Sophia to tell her the Tuesday lunch place was doing a new tasting menu, and did she want to try it. I didn't mention Louisa. I didn't mention Louisa for several weeks. December in Boston is either beautiful or punishing, and that year it was both. A week of snow that turned everything soft and quiet, followed by a week of ice that turned everything treacherous. I spent most of it inside, or between inside and outside, doing the ordinary work of my ordinary life, and trying very hard not to think about the fact that Louisa's studio residency was 2 blocks from my office. I knew this because Sophia mentioned it. I memorized the cross streets before I'd even consciously decided to. I started taking a slightly different route to lunch. I won't pretend this was entirely unconscious. Some part of me knew I was avoiding a proximity I hadn't asked to want, but I had this skill, I've had it most of my life, of keeping my inner and outer selves in separate rooms. The outer me went to work, went to pottery class, had lunch with Sophia on Tuesdays, slept adequately, ate reasonable food, was competent and present and fine. The inner me was conducting a kind of private excavation that I hadn't given it permission to conduct, turning over small things in the dark. The way Louisa had said my name at that gallery opening, the specific quality of her silence in Sophia's kitchen, the fact that the frequency conversation had felt less like getting to know someone and more like being understood. I kept the inner me busy with rationalization. She was interesting. Obviously interesting, the kind of person who made you think differently about things. I had always valued that in a friendship, genuine intellectual friction, someone who pushed you toward a more complete version of your own thinking. That was all this was. A friendship that hadn't fully formed yet. The particular brightness of a new connection that felt significant, because new connections feel significant when you've kept your circle deliberately small. I was very thorough about the rationalization, very organized. The thing that broke through it was not dramatic. It was a Saturday afternoon in mid-December, 3 weeks after the kitchen table conversation. Sophia had invited me to a holiday party at her cousin's apartment in JP, the kind of gathering that starts at 4 and ends when everyone runs out of both energy and wine. I almost didn't go. I almost cited the weather, which was genuinely bad. But Sophia did that thing where she says, "I just want you to be there," with a specific tone that means she actually wants you there, and I got in my car. Louisa was at the party. I didn't know she'd be there. I want to be clear about that. I walked in and saw her across the room talking to someone I didn't recognize, wearing a dark green sweater with the sleeves pushed up, laughing at something with her head thrown back, the full-body laugh I had only seen once before, at Sophia's mother's birthday party, when her mother had told a joke with the punchline in Spanish. And I felt my chest do something that I could not, standing in the doorway still holding my coat, explain away as friendship. It was not subtle. It was not manageable. It was the physical sensation of wanting to be across the room in a way that had nothing to do with geography. I put my coat down. I got a drink. I talked to Sophia's cousin for 20 minutes about something I could not now tell you, and I was present for none of it. I was aware of where Louisa was the way you're aware of something bright in your peripheral vision. Constantly, and with the particular kind of trying not to look that is its own form of looking. She found me eventually. "You made it," she said. "Barely," I said. "The roads are terrible." "I know. I biked." "That's insane." "Probably," she agreed, and then she smiled. And it was the same smile from Sophia's kitchen. The one that was private, the one that felt like it was specifically for me, and I thought, I am in trouble. Not yet willing to say what kind of trouble. But I knew the shape of it. I knew it the way you know you've caught something before the symptoms fully arrive. The knowledge precedes the evidence. We talked for most of the party. I'm aware of how that sounds. Sophia was there. Other people were there. It was a gathering of 20 or 30 people, and 2 of them spent the evening largely in each other's orbit. I don't know how visible it was. I know I was not invisible to myself. At one point, I went to get another drink, and I stood in the kitchen for a moment alone, and I had a conversation with myself that went approximately, "This is what it feels like." And then, "That's not useful." And then, "No, but it's true." And then I went back out to the living room. She was telling someone a story when I came back, and she glanced at me when I returned to my spot near the window. And there was something in that glance, quick, certain, unhurried, that suggested she had noticed my absence and had registered my return, and the noticing and the registering were not nothing. I drove home alone again. This time I didn't sit in the parking lot. I went straight inside, and I stood in the middle of my kitchen, and I let myself, for the first time, say the thing I had been carefully not saying. I was falling for my best friend's sister. Not fell, not had fallen. Falling. Present continuous, already in progress, gravity already in effect. I stood in my kitchen for a while after that. Then I made tea and went to bed and stared at the ceiling and thought, with the very careful part of my mind that never really stops working, this is complicated. But I didn't know how complicated. What I didn't know, what I could not have known, standing in my kitchen with cold tea and the particular heaviness of something finally admitted, was that Sophia was carrying something too. That Sophia had been carrying it for longer than I had. That the shape of her something was entirely different from mine and entirely bound up in mine. And that when it came out, the way these things eventually do, the way pressure eventually finds release, it would change everything that I thought I understood about the situation I was in. That was all coming. I didn't know it yet. What I knew, in December, was Louisa. The specific way she occupied space. The sound of her laugh in a room. The particular attention she gave me, which felt different from how she gave her attention to other people. More direct, more patient, more like something she had decided to offer, rather than something that was simply available. I knew the feeling of wanting to see her, and the equal and opposite feeling of knowing that seeing her was becoming dangerous. Not dangerous because of anything she had done. Dangerous because of what I was becoming. Less careful, less contained, less certain of the walls I had spent a long time building inside myself. January arrived. I did not reach out to Louisa independently. I waited instead for situations that would produce her naturally. Sophia's invitations, family gatherings, the ordinary machinery of a friendship that included proximity to her sister. I told myself this was reasonable. I told myself I was being careful. I was also checking my phone more than usual, and sleeping less well than I had in years, and standing in front of my closet every time I knew I might see her, which was new, which I noticed and set aside because the noticing was inconvenient. The second weekend of January, Sophia invited me to help her pack up some boxes at her parents' house. Her mother was reorganizing one of the upstairs rooms and needed the attic cleared out. A family project, she said. A few hours. Louisa would be there. I knew before I arrived that this was going to be the day something shifted. I don't know how I knew. Some part of me had been paying attention to the shape of things for months, tracking the slow accumulation of almost moments, and it understood the trajectory. We were in the attic for 2 hours, Sophia and Louisa and me, sorting through 30 years of accumulated history. Old textbooks and holiday decorations and boxes of photographs and the particular archaeological richness of a family's stored life. Sophia got a phone call partway through, her work, the 6:30 a.m. meeting variety of urgency, and stepped outside to take it. Louisa and I kept sorting. The attic was cold, the light was gray through the small window, and we worked in a comfortable quiet that I had come to associate specifically with her, the kind of silence that wasn't empty. At one point, we both reached for the same box, and our hands were close enough that I could feel the warmth of her without touching her, and I pulled back first. And when I looked up, she was already looking at me. She didn't say anything. I didn't say anything. But the room was different after that. Something had shifted in the air, the way air shifts before weather arrives. I was intensely aware of the distance between us, 2 feet, maybe less, and of my own breathing, which had become something I was managing rather than doing automatically. "I have a question," she said after a while. "Okay," I said. My voice was steady. I was proud of that. "Do you feel it too?" she said. "Or is it just me?" It was not actually a question, the way she said it. There was no upward inflection. It was the shape of a question with the weight of a statement. The kind of thing you say when you already know the answer, and you're just asking for the courtesy of having it said out loud. I looked at her for a long moment. "I feel it," I said. She nodded slowly, like I had confirmed something she had been holding carefully for a while, and she looked down at the box in front of her, and then she looked back up, and what was in her expression was not triumph or relief. It was something more complicated, something that understood the complication. "Sophia," she started. "I know," I said. We were both quiet. Below us, through the floor, we could hear Sophia's voice rising and falling in the cadence of a professional phone call. The particular rhythm of someone managing something from a distance. The ordinary sound of our best friend's life continuing. "I'm not going to do anything," I said. It was not a promise to her. It was a statement about myself, a declaration of the line I was drawing. Not because I didn't feel it, but because I felt everything that was tangled around it, and the weight of the tangle was considerable. "I know that too," Louisa said. And then Sophia came back upstairs and we went back to sorting boxes. And the afternoon continued in the ordinary way that afternoons continue when something extraordinary has just been carefully set down. I held the feeling in both hands for the rest of the day, examining it with the kind of attention I gave my most careful work. It was not simple. It was not comfortable. But it was, in some essential and terrifying way, the most fully real thing I had felt in years. The drive home was quiet, just me and the city lights and the weight of something I had named but couldn't hold. Not yet. Possibly not ever. But named. That was January. What came next, I didn't see coming at all. But before we continue, if you've made it this far, it's because something in this story is touching something you know. That feeling Mary is carrying, the weight of a truth you've named but can't yet act on. The particular ache of standing at the edge of something real and not knowing whether it's safe to step. Hit the like button right now. It's the easiest way to tell me this kind of story matters to you, and it helps me keep bringing them. And if you're not subscribed yet, subscribe now and turn on the bell. YouTube will notify you the next time a new story goes up. Tell me in the comments, have you ever been in a situation where you fully knew what you were feeling, but the timing was completely wrong? Not because you didn't want it, but because everything around it was too tangled. Have you ever chosen to hold something instead of act on it? Write it for me. I read every single one. And tell me, what city are you watching from? I'll leave a heart. Now, back to our story. Sophia told me on a Thursday evening in February. We were at our Tuesday lunch place. I know it was Thursday. We'd moved the lunch because she'd had a conflict. Sitting with our usual order in front of us, and I could tell something was different from the moment she sat down. Sophia is not a subtle person, which has always been one of her great strengths. She doesn't have the architecture for long concealment. She was quieter than usual, and she kept moving things around on the table, the salt shaker, her water glass, a small stack of sugar packets that hadn't been there before she started reorganizing them. And I had known her long enough to understand that this kind of restlessness had a specific meaning. "You okay?" I asked. "Yes," she said, and then, "No, I need to tell you something, and I've been trying to figure out how for about 6 weeks. 6 weeks. My chest did something complicated at the number. "Okay," I said. She looked at me across the table with an expression I can only describe as determined and terrified in equal measure, and I had a sudden lurch-inducing intuition about what was coming. Not certainty, but a shape, a strong presentiment of the shape. "Mary," she said, "I think I've been in love with you for a long time." The restaurant continued around us. The server passed behind Sophia with a tray. Someone laughed too loudly 2 tables over. The ordinary world kept doing its ordinary thing with complete indifference to the fact that the landscape of my life had just shifted in a way I was going to need a significant amount of time to understand. I looked at Sophia. Sophia, who I had known for 12 years. Sophia, who had cried at my apartment after every bad thing that had happened to her, and who I had held on her couch more times than I could count. Sophia, who made me laugh harder than almost anyone. Sophia, who had been, for more than a decade, one of the people I most trusted with the interior of myself. Sophia, who was looking at me now with a courage that I recognized as real, and that cost her something real, and who was waiting. I didn't say anything for what felt like a long time. "I needed you to know," she said, before the silence became too much. I'm not asking you for anything. I know you're not. I know this isn't." She stopped, reorganized. "I've been carrying it around and it got too heavy, and you deserve to know even if the answer is that it doesn't change anything." "Sophia," I said. "You don't have to say anything," she said quickly. "Really, we can just—" "Sophia," I said again, more gently this time. "Give me a minute." She stopped. She looked at her water glass. I sat with what was inside me and tried to be honest with myself in the way you owe your closest people. What I felt, hearing Sophia say those words, was tenderness. Deep, genuine. The kind that comes from years of accumulated trust and care and shared history. It was real. She was one of the people I loved most in the world, in the specific way that has nothing to do with being in love. What I didn't feel And this is the part I needed to sit with, because honesty is more complicated than simply saying the comforting thing, was what she was hoping I felt. I knew what being in love felt like now. I had a reference point I hadn't had 6 weeks ago. I had stood in an attic in January and said I feel it, and known what I was naming. And the feeling in that attic was different from what I felt for Sophia, in the specific way that made all the difference, which meant that the situation I was sitting in was more tangled than any situation I had ever been in before. Because Louisa, who I was in love with, or falling toward in a way that was beginning to be indistinguishable from being in love with, was Sophia's sister. And Sophia was sitting across from me telling me she loved me. And I was going to have to find a way to tell the truth without breaking something that couldn't be unbroken. "Sophia," I said, "you're one of the most important people in my life. You know that." "I do," she said quietly. "And I love you. That's real. That's as real as anything I have." "But," she said. "But not in the way you're describing," I said. "And I think you knew that was a possibility. I think that's why it took you 6 weeks." She was quiet. She picked up her water glass. "Put it down without drinking." "I think I hoped," she said, "that if I said it out loud, it might be different." "I know," I said. And I did know. I understood that particular variety of hope, the kind where you have the evidence already, but you want the verdict to be different. I understood it with a clarity that I suspected Louisa had something to do with. We sat for a long time. The food got cold. We talked in the careful way you talk when you're both trying to protect something that has value and is suddenly fragile. Sophia cried a little, quietly, in the way she rarely cried, without drama, just the honest overflow of something she had held too long. I held her hand across the table and didn't offer platitudes and let her feel what she was feeling without rushing her through it. Before she left, she said, "We're going to be okay." "Yes," I said. "We are." I meant it. I believed it. But I also knew that I was sitting inside a knot that I didn't know how to untangle, because there was something I had not said, something I was still holding. Something that involved her sister, and a question in an attic, and a truth I had named but couldn't act on, and now a new complication that made acting on it even more impossible. I sat alone at the table after she left. I thought about what love cost, the various kinds of it, the ways it could arrive in the wrong configuration, the wrong timing, the wrong tangle of loyalties and history and affection, and still be entirely real. Still demand to be taken seriously. I thought about Louisa. I hadn't spoken to her since the attic. We had not made any agreement about that. There was no pact of silence, no explicit decision to step back. But I had felt the weight of what had been said between us in that cold gray light, and the weight had been enough to keep me from reaching out. Not because I didn't want to, because I wanted to too much. And the situation around it had too many other people in it. People I cared about. People who could be hurt by careless movement. But now Sophia had told me what she was carrying, and I was sitting in the restaurant alone, thinking about the particular cruelty of a situation where the person you were falling toward was the sister of the person who had just fallen toward you. And underneath all of it, beneath the careful analysis and the genuine grief for Sophia's pain, and the complicated gratitude for her honesty, underneath all of that, was the thing I could not stop feeling. Louisa. The specific gravity of her. The way a room changed when she was in it. The question she had asked me in the attic, "Do you feel it too?" And the answer I had given. Which was true. Which remained true. Which had not lost any of its truth just because the situation around it had gotten more complicated. I went home. I sat with all of it. I did not reach out to Louisa, but I thought about her name the way you think about something you are trying not to say out loud. 4 days later, she called me. She said, I heard about Sophia. She told me. I wanted you to know that she told me, so you don't have to figure out what to say. I sat down on my couch. Okay, I said. I also wanted to know if you were okay. Are you? I asked. A small silence. It's complicated, she said. Yeah, I said. Another silence. Longer. The kind that had weight and texture. I'm not going anywhere, she said finally. I needed to say that. I don't have an agenda. I'm not asking for anything. I'm telling you that you don't have to manage this alone. I pressed my hand flat against my sternum without meaning to. Thank you, I said. Okay, she said. Okay, I said. We stayed on the phone for 40 more minutes. We talked about something else entirely. A show she had been watching, a problem I was having with a section of the Somerville project, whether the cereal with the marshmallows was objectively the superior option, or whether we had both simply been convinced by effective childhood marketing. We talked the way we always talked, with that particular ease that I had stopped pretending was nothing. When we hung up, I sat in my apartment in the quiet, and I felt something I had not felt in a long time. Not resolution. Nothing as clean as that. But the sense that I was standing on ground that was real. That whatever came next would come from an honest place. And that honesty, even when it was complicated, even when it cost something, was the only material worth building anything with. I didn't know what came next. I still don't. Sitting here now, trying to put this into words. What I know is what I felt in the attic, and what I feel every time I hear her voice, and what that feeling is made of. Not infatuation, not the bright surface-level recognition of someone interesting, something more structural. Something that had been building in me since an October afternoon, when she opened a door and looked at me with that mildly curious expression, and said, "You must be Mary," with the particular tone of someone confirming something they had half expected. The kind of knowing that doesn't announce itself, that just arrives and waits. And I know what Sophia needs right now. Space, time, the reassurance that our friendship is bigger than this moment, which it is, which it will survive, because 12 years of real friendship does not dissolve in one hard conversation. She needs to find her own footing, and I need to let her do that without making things more complicated by moving toward something she would have to see. So I am holding. Not with distance, not with the cold management of feelings that I have spent years practicing, but with intention. With the knowledge that some things need the right moment, that not every real feeling has to be acted on immediately, that sometimes love is a thing you carry for a while before you know what to do with it. Louisa knows this. I think she has known it from the beginning. I think the question she asked in the attic, "Do you feel it too?" was not a question about what happens next. It was a question about truth. Just truth. The simple, costly fact of it. And I answered it honestly. And that had to be enough for now. The February light was changing, getting longer. There was still ice on the sidewalks, but the light was starting to come back. That specific late winter quality where you can feel the year turning even if everything is still cold. The world doing what the world does, continuing, changing slowly, keeping its own timing despite what you would prefer. We met in person again in March. It was not planned, the way the most important things often aren't. I was at a coffee shop near the studio residency building, the one on the cross streets I had spent 2 months deliberately not passing. And I had stopped there because it had started raining and I had forgotten my umbrella, and sometimes the universe just does that. She was already there. She looked up from her notebook when I walked in, and she did not look surprised. I did not look surprised either. I ordered coffee, and sat down across from her without being asked, and the rain continued against the windows, and the coffee shop was warm and full of the ordinary sounds of people going about their days. Keyboards and conversations, and the particular ambient noise of a city inside itself. "Hi," she said. "Hi," I said. She had a drawing in progress, something that looked architectural, maybe a building, maybe a body. The ambiguity, intentional. Her pen was resting on the page. She did not put the notebook away. We talked for a while about easy things. The project. Her residency, which was ending in 3 weeks. Where she thought she might go next. There was something in Iceland. A remote residency. 6 weeks in a place with almost no light in winter. Which sounded to me like a creative context, and to her like a necessity. Sophia. The conversation about Sophia was careful and kind. The way conversations about people you both love can be when everyone involved is trying to be honest and protect something at the same time. Sophia was doing better. She had told me so herself. A phone call 2 weeks earlier, her voice lighter, the particular emotional honesty of someone who had put something down and found the ground easier to stand on without it. She had said, "I think I needed to say it more than I needed anything to happen because of it." I had believed her, because I knew her, and because that was a kind of courage I recognized. Louisa already knew all of this. "She's going to be okay," I said. "She's always been okay," Louisa said. Sophia is fundamentally okay in a way that I've always been a little jealous of, actually. She feels things completely and then she moves through them. I tend to store things. "I know," I said. She looked at me. "You do," she said. It was not a question. "I noticed that early. You pay attention in a particular way. It's not comfortable always." "I know," I said again. "I'm sorry." "Don't be," she said. "It's one of the things." She picked up her pen. "Put it down. It's one of the things that makes you. You. The rain on the windows. The warm air. The particular suspension of a moment that knows it is a moment." "I'm going to Iceland," she said. "I know. And when I come back..." She stopped. "You don't have to say it," I said. "I think I do," she said. "Not for you. For me. I think I need to say, when I come back, things will be different. Not because anything will have been resolved, but because time does that. It changes the shape of things without necessarily changing what they are." I thought about that. "Sophia will have had more time," I said. "Yes," she said. "And you will have had more time. And I will have had 6 weeks in a place with no light, which tends to clarify things whether you want it to or not." "What do you think it will clarify?" I asked. She was quiet for a moment. When she looked at me, it was the same look from the attic. Direct, unhurried, the kind that had nowhere else to be. "What I already know," she said. "But in different light." I held that. I held it the way I had been holding everything since January. Carefully, with both hands, aware of the weight of it, aware that it was real. "Okay," I said. "Okay," she said. We finished our coffee. The rain slowed. She went back to her drawing and I sat across from her, not talking, in the particular comfortable silence that had always existed between us, the one that felt less like absence of words and more like a different kind of conversation, the kind that doesn't need sound. When I finally stood up to leave, she looked up from the notebook. "Mary," she said. "Yeah," I said. She held my gaze for a moment. Something passed between us that was not a word. Something that acknowledged everything that had been named, and everything that remained unresolved, and everything that was, nonetheless, real. "Take care of yourself while I'm gone," she said. "I will," I said. "You too." And then I left. I walked out into the rain, which had mostly stopped, leaving the city smelling like wet asphalt and the specific green smell of early spring trying to arrive. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment with my face tilted up slightly and my eyes closed. What I felt was not happiness, exactly. Not relief. Not the clean resolution of something finally settled. What I felt was the particular rightness of a truth that has been given its correct name, the weight of something real. held without pretending it was something else. The quiet knowledge that some things don't need to be rushed toward, that some things have their own timing, and that honoring that timing is not the same as giving up on them. I felt the shape of something that was still unfinished, still open, still somewhere in the unresolvable middle of itself. But I felt it clearly, without the careful layering of avoidance I had spent months constructing, without the organized rationalization, without the controlled, habitual distance I had always kept between myself and things that were real enough to hurt. Just the truth of it. Just what it was. Somewhere in Iceland, eventually, there would be no light. And in that no light she would sit with what she already knew and let it become clearer. And I would be here, in this city, in my life, taking care of myself, as promised. And when she came back, I didn't know. I genuinely didn't know. There was Sophia to consider, always, the texture of that friendship, and what it needed to remain whole. There was the question of timing, of readiness, of whether the careful, complicated truth between us was something that could eventually be given more room. I didn't know, but I was no longer pretending not to feel it. That was not nothing. That was, in fact, everything that was possible right now. And possible was enough. Not yet, but real. And somewhere, under the not yet, moving toward something I couldn't see the shape of yet. A yet. Quiet. Honest. Patient. Still here. Some feelings don't resolve on our timeline. They arrive. They wait. They ask us to hold them without rushing them toward conclusions they aren't ready for yet. Mary didn't get the easy ending, but she got something harder and more valuable. Herself, finally. Clear-eyed, honest, willing to feel something real without managing it into something smaller. That kind of love takes patience. The kind of love that says, I see you, I feel this, and I'm willing to wait for the moment when we can both stand in it without it costing someone we love something they can't afford. If this story stayed with you, if you recognize something in it, write still here in the comments. That's how I know you made it all the way to the end with me. And if you want to keep walking with stories like this, stories that live in the honest, complicated middle of things, click the video that's appearing on your screen right now. Thank you for being here. A big hug, and until our next story.